Intel recently held an Architecture Day which was hosted by Raja Kaduri. We cover that over on kitguru.net in our news in a couple of pieces. And soon after that, Raja delivered an address at Hot Chips, the annual event in California, which not surprisingly was held as a virtual event this year. So yes, I paid money to sit at my PC and watch Raja on video. Intel sent a gift box to those of us who'd signed up for Hot Chips, and while that was a generous gesture, it made me wonder why Intel would want their name associated with the theme of real hot, as the contents of the gift box were all hot and spicy products. On a separate note, I recently had a birthday, which is not the sort of thing I'd usually mention in a work video. However, our friends at Techtesters in the Netherlands sent me a package of birthday treats, including cake and alcohol. That was damn kind of them. Thank you, Stephen and Nada. And while I'm in a party mood, let me ask you, have you subscribed to Kit Guru Tech on YouTube? Do you regularly read kitguru.net for news and reviews? If the answer is no, hit the bell button now. Intel has 6 pillars of technology, which is more than other companies. The pillars are software, security, interconnect, memory, XPU architecture, and process and packaging. Security is an Intel pillar of technology. Before we look at the subjects that Intel was very keen to talk about, let's discuss something Intel seems quite keen to brush under the carpet. Judging by a document that I've seen, Intel is not certain they will hang on to the design win for the Aurora supercomputer at the Argonne National Laboratory, or at least not in the current form. They're talking about how they will deliver the technology foundation for the Aurora supercomputer, which is designed specifically for the convergence of artificial intelligence and high-performance computing at extreme computing scale. The problem here is Ponte Vecchio is going to be on 7 nanometer, and Intel appears to be incapable of manufacturing on 7 nanometer and shipping products in the very near future. Perhaps 7 nanometer in the future, perhaps they could do Ponte Vecchio on, say, 10 nanometer in the immediate future, but Ponte Vecchio on 7 nanometer right now, that is a major drama. My best guess is that Aurora will ship with graphics from another vendor that may later be swapped out for Ponte Vecchio. So what has Intel wanted to talk about? It's all about the future. Surprise, surprise. The present is a problem, so you talk about the future. And Intel is very keen to talk about clever packaging that stitches chips together. Chips on different processes and using different technologies, and then they'll stack them as high as you like. There's very little mention about how they're going to dissipate heat from chips that are stacked up, and that means that process technology ceases to be an issue because you're not making enormous monolithic chips. And this also means that Moore's law will continue because they can continue to pack more transistors into a certain amount of cubic millimeters rather than an area of square millimeters. Intel confirmed that Alder Lake, which will be 12th gen, is launching in H2 2021 and will be a hybrid product. It's going to have a combination of big Sunny Cove cores and little Gracemont cores, their Atom cores. That sounds like a laptop processor to me. I can see that 8 small cores working away when you're doing bits and pieces with the bigger cores kicking in when the workload goes up. That makes sense. In fact, I quite like the idea if I'm entirely honest. Whereas 12th gen Alder Lake S on the desktop with the new LGA 1700 socket, I don't begin to understand what that's all about. I don't want 8 plus 8 cores, which notionally equals 16. I want 12 or 16 cores, ideally running at very high clock speeds on very little power. This approach strikes me as making no sense whatsoever for the desktop. But we've said over the years that Intel is frankly losing interest in the desktop. Laptops, mobile is where it's at. While Intel was talking about Alder Lake, it was noticeable they were not talking about 11th gen Rocket Lake, which is due to launch later this year on the same LGA 1200 socket as Comet Lake S. The news with Rocket Lake, we understand, is it will deliver PCI Express Gen 4, which is absolutely essential to support the next gen of graphics cards which are coming soon. However, the core count is due to drop from 10 to 8, which sounds like a backward step. Perhaps Intel will push the all-core turbo beyond 5 GHz, which would be a nice headline figure. but you have to wonder how an 8-core processor running at whatever speed is going to be a match for AMD Zen 3, which is due to launch later this year. Intel was very keen to talk about their graphics. The graphics with a weird name. Z? Xe? How do you pronounce it? If only there was somebody to answer that question. Perhaps Dr. Ian Cuttress.
Xe, or as Raja Koduri initially said, it should have been EXE, as in executable or exascale for everyone.
Excellent, that's tidied things up nicely. Intel tells us that XE-LP is in production and will be called DG1. Our first experience of XE graphics is likely to be in Tiger Lake, which is a laptop part, replaces Ice Lake, and is due to be announced in a week or two. Intel also announced that their Xe-HP graphics are sampling to data center customers. The graphics depend heavily on how many tiles are nailed together, and the power draw appears to go through the roof, hundreds and hundreds of watts. Xe-LP and Xe-HP use Intel 10nm SuperFin. We covered this on kitguru.net a week and so ago. This is a fascinating new technology from Intel, covered in depth in their slides, but essentially a clever new transistor that allows their chips to run super fast. Thing is, while those graphics chips are going to be built by Intel themselves, we expect the Xe-HPG gaming graphics chip will be built by TSMC. We know Raja has a long history of TSMC. We know that Intel has problems manufacturing things. Going to TSMC for the gaming chips, that makes sense, but it is surely a massive sign of the times that Intel cannot apparently manufacture Xe-HPG in its own fabs. On the subject of manufacturing graphics chips, the current rumour is that Nvidia's new Ampere RTX 3090, if that is the correct name for the super high-end graphics chip, is rumoured to be a triple slot for the Founders Edition, and the GPU will pull 250 watts, while the graphics card as a whole 330 to 350. Remove the power limit and overclock, people are talking about 400 watts, but that's obviously pure speculation. But the big boy, the 3090, looks absolutely enormous in the leaked photos that we've seen. The thing is, Nvidia's not having Ampere made at TSMC, apparently because they got in there too late or tried to negotiate on price or some such, and TSMC was having none of it. So for 2020, the Ampere chips are all expected to come out of Samsung, and Samsung's process is not as efficient as TSMC's, hence the power draw is higher. If those same chips were made on TSMC, as Nvidia had wanted, we can confidently predict the power draw would have been less, but right now it looks like the upcoming Ampere GPUs are going to be super juicy. Tiger Lake is imminent. Tiger Lake is going to use Willow Cove cores, and we now understand the big change with Willow Cove is 10nm SF or superfin transistors. The Sunny Cove cores in Ice Lake run terribly slow. 4 GHz is good going, the performance is dismal. The big change for Tiger Lake being Willow Cove means they're gaining a load of clock speed. Instead of 4 GHz, you're heading towards 5 GHz. I said this a few weeks ago. Tiger Lake sounds potentially really exciting. The problem is we understand these new superfin transistors require more juice, and the rumours are in the territory of 30%. So where a processor might have required, to make the maths easy, 50 watts, it could well be the new Tiger Lake is going to be 65 watts. That's a huge step up in power for a laptop chip, and it can only make AMD rub their hands with glee. I'm looking forward to seeing Tiger Lake, honestly I am, but if to get the performance back Intel's had to bump up the power draw and presumably also hurt battery life, that sounds like bad news. Intel is promising all sorts of good stuff later in the future, but right now 2020 looks like another grim year for Big Blue. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the bell button, subscribe, but you've already subscribed, haven't you? I'm Leo Waldock. Be sure to head over to kitguru.net to read our news and reviews.